brand presentation themselves. This is a little brochure, a little handbook folder I created several years ago as a way to describe the region. So frankly, I mean, St. Michel is Wine Estates is the company, but a little bit about the Washington State. Now, there's a real, what they call a dichotomy between the eastern part of the state and the western part of the state. So when some people think of Washington, they think of Seattle, you know, sleepless in Seattle, or you know, it's a rainy, cool environment like Vancouver, British Columbia, very close to each other, Portland, Oregon. And that's what people first see in their minds or see movies or television shows. But that's not where the grapes come from. Here, this is first it's a map of the state of Washington, and as you can see here on the left side of the green, the mountains, those are called the Cascade Mountains, and the Cascade Mountains range in height between 3,000 to 4,000 meters. On the west side of the mountains is a rainforest. That's the Olympic Peninsula. It gets up to 200 plus centimeters of rain a year. And what doesn't stay as rain becomes snow on top of those mountains all year long. On the east side of the mountains, it becomes a desert. We get less than 20 centimeters of rain a year. So you probably heard the term before, we call that a rain shadow. You know, some parts of Mendoza or like in Alsace, the mountains, you create a rain shadow. So we go from 200 centimeters to the west. Over the mountains, we get less than 20 centimeters of rain. And in this area here where you see the green viticultural area, that's the viticultural area of the Columbia Valley. The Columbia Valley takes its name from the river that flows down from Canada and divides the states between Oregon and Washington. And that's why we call it the Columbia River. If you want to turn it to the other side, we have all these various graphs and charts to illustrate the amount of rainfall that we receive. Also the light. We get, because of our latitude between the 45th to 46th parallel, it's on the same latitude as between Bordeaux and Champagne. That's the only reason we show you the picture of France and picture of the Columbia Valley, not because we're telling you the wines are like Bordeaux wines or they're like anything else, but we're on the same latitude as that part of Europe. The Columbia Valley and Napa Valley. The Columbia Valley receives about 17 hours of daylight, similar to Bordeaux, where Napa Valley gets about 15 hours of daylight during the peak growing season, which is similar to Spain or southern Italy. So it's not a matter of quality, it's just a matter of style. As I mentioned to you before, I like to describe this region as the best of both worlds. So one of the key elements that makes it that way, it's the temperature. We have a very large, what they call a diurnal temperature shift. So our daytime temperatures during the peak growing season will go from 30, 35 plus degrees during the day, but the temperatures will drop to around 10 degrees in the evening. So that shift between the high of the day, which ripens the grapes as we'd like to get the sugar, but those cool nights keep the acidity, which is why we call the fruit of the New World, but the acidity, the structure that you most assimilate to the Old World. That's why we use the term the best of both worlds.
The wine is showing that.
And so this is, again, it's not about Washington being better or Napa being better or this one being better. It's all about being different. So it's the whole viticultural area is only about 15,000 hectares. As an example, Napa Valley, which is about 18,000 hectares. So it's a small premium appellation, but the cost for value relationship, or I say value for quality, is very good in the state of Washington, because this region that I showed you here, it's 4 hours away from Seattle versus somewhere like Napa Valley, which is only an hour and a half away from San Francisco. So the land cost, it's like being in the middle of Sao Paulo. You build a big building, it costs you one price. You go out to the other side of the country, in the middle of the country, it'll cost you a different price. So the land costs here are very low, hence we can make very high quality wines and keep very good value. Well, that's first part of my presentation is about the region itself, so you have an understanding of the geography of where we are. The only other piece I would just add, because some people have been to Oregon, and I usually get this question at some point, that we grow a lot of varietals in the Columbia Valley, except basically one. We don't, well, two. We don't do Zinfandel, very good for California, but we do, and we don't grow Pinot Noir. Now, for those who've been to Oregon, you know that we do. That's very well known for its Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, the Pinot family, sort of like the South Valley, South Island of New Zealand, you could say. The main reason is very, very easy, is that as I showed you here with the Columbia Valley, is primarily on the eastern side of the mountains. It's too warm for Pinot Noir, but as these mountains go south, they also head east, creating what's primarily called the Willamette Valley. And the Willamette Valley is about 100 kilometers east of the ocean, so it's far enough inland to get the warm days to ripen, just enough, but still cool enough to keep the quality and the acidity that you need in Pinot Noir. So just so you know how all the viticultural areas work out. So Oregon being to the south, the valleys are all to the west of the mountains, the Columbia Valley are all east of the mountains. Okay? And they're in the Walla Walla region. Now, first about the name Walla Walla, which is a AVA, which is an American viticultural area. Right? As you know, that's how we classify our regions. And Walla Walla is, why Walla Walla? Why twice? Well, it's usually the question like New York, New York. Well, Walla these are names that come from American indigenous Indians. And the language, they had no adjectives in their language about great or many or more. So if they wanted to say something was more, they said it twice. Walla being water, so Walla Walla is water waters, because in the region where Walla Walla is, the three rivers come together. The Columbia River, the Yakima River that flows from the Cascade Mountains, the Columbia River comes from Canada, and the Snake River comes from the eastern part of the states that flow together and join there in the Walla Walla area, and they flow out into the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean. Now, in the area, there was a town, they named, the town goes back to the late 1700s. It was called Frenchtown. Now, why Frenchtown? It's because back in the late 1700s and into the 1800s, fur traders in Canada, as they're in the middle of Canada, Manitoba, Alberta area, to get the fur from the central part of Canada to the ocean to trade, they had to come down the Columbia River. When they got to this place, they stayed there, developed a community, because it was a staging area going between the Canadian boat for the Canadians to come down and to stay there, and then for the furs to go out to the Columbia River, out to the Pacific, so they could be sailed off to lands around the world. So they called it Frenchtown. Basically named, they didn't have a state name. We didn't have the state of Washington. We didn't have the Columbia Valley. They called them districts. So the first schoolhouse, this was the original schoolhouse that was built in that region, and it was just called District 41. That's how the governments of the area identified that place. They didn't have a name. It was District 41. So any children that were in the area that needed to go to a school, there was the one school for everybody that wherever lived there, and that's why they called it L'école 41, named after Frenchtown, and the schoolhouse District 41. So that's how the name became what it is today. In the state of Washington, 11 viticultural areas that are identified, legal appellations. So the region of Walla Walla is right down here. So this is the area here. So it's on the most eastern, southern AVA in the Columbia Valley. It actually, parts of the Walla Walla appellation, you'll see in my next slide, goes, half of it, or most of it, actually is on the Oregon side of the region here. So it's over here.
O estado de Washington.
The close-up version of the appellation, as I mentioned here. So here are is the rivers go. So this is the border of Oregon. So here's Oregon. As you can see, a large part of the appellation actually flows down on the other side of the border of Oregon. But this is the river, as I mentioned over here, in the area of Loudon, where the rivers all combine. So the river, the Columbia River, as it comes down here, turns this way. So there's no water, no river on this side of the Columbia Valley. Okay? But this is where the grapes, key vineyard areas that you're going to be trying these wines today, come from these particular vineyard areas around the area through this region here. But still Walla Walla, still Washington State. Now, there are producers that make wine that just bottle wine from grapes grown only on the Oregon side. So you will see labels that say Walla Walla, Oregon, and Walla Walla, Washington. But LaCole makes all their wines in the state of Washington, so they label all their wines Washington State.
Aqui é close da
The third winery in the valley. The first two was a winery called Leonetti, started by Gary Figgins. And his neighbor, LaCole 41's neighbor, Rick Small, has a winery called Woodwood Canyon. And so these were the first three wineries that started only since the mid-'80s, 1983. It was the 20th in the state at that time. Just to give you an example, today we have over 400 wineries since 1983 till tonight. So I really like to stress about the wines from this winery particularly and about our region, as I like to use the word typicity. It's really, typicity, if you know what that word means, it's a word that basically it's a wines that reflect its terroir. Truly about their soils, their climate, and when you see more about the soils next, you'll see what I'm saying. I think that's really what identifies wines from Washington State. Overall, the majority of the soils would be this and this, because basically the whole Columbia Valley was created at the end of the Ice Age, when thousands of years of these glacial lakes were formed, melted, pushed out to the ocean, formed again, and done over thousands of years. So what you have there is this wind, it's called lust. It's a very desert sandy soils, which is blown over for many, many thousands of kilometers, laid deposited there. But below that is volcanic basalt rock. So basically you have basalt volcanic rock, because those active Cascade Mountains are still active volcanoes. And on top of that you have the very sandy, fast draining, infertile soil. Another glacial period where the glaciers came, deposited, the lakes backed up, went through. And each one of those layers was another one of those catastrophic floods that was created. Yeah. And the alluvial gravel, is from the river areas, so you have these very different diverse soils. Brands, as the wines follow, the salmon does as well, so it's kind of nice little way.
Esse é o slogan do Salmon Safe, sip and safe. Você toma o gole e salva o salmão.